Well, good morning. Great, good. Glad you all got up in time to come to this wonderful program. Our guest today is my good friend Joe Kita. He and his wife Maria live in Schnecksville, about 8 miles where I used to live in West Allentown. But we both had to travel 2,500 miles to meet each other. And that was on January of 2007, where Joe was aboard the Crystal Symphony giving his enrichment lectures, which he's done for the last 15 years with them. And I was on doing my thing on the ship as well. We're going from Los Angeles down the coast down into South America, so we got a lot of time to get to know each other and laugh about how we lived so close but had to come so far to meet each other. His workshop, Memoirs at Sea, is a featured part of the enrichment program for Crystal Cruises and has been, as I said, for the last 15 years. Joe is author of 6 books. He's a freelance writer and has had articles in the Saturday Evening Post and your favorite, AARP magazine. And earlier in his career, he was editor of a men's magazine for the Rodale Press, which is now defunct.
Right. Owned by Hearst.
Joe was the guiding force that encouraged me to write about my travel experiences in my book. And likely I never would have done it had it not been for attending his workshops when aboard ship. I learned a lot of lessons from him and used them all, and he guided me through that process to my final book. So, if I can do it, so surely can you. So please give Joe Kita, my good friend, a warm welcome.
Thank you, Jim. Thanks very much, Jim. Hope everyone can hear me in the back. Okay, great. So for the next 90 minutes, we're going to be talking about memoir writing. And the name of this talk is Beginning is Half Done, okay? The hardest part is getting started, believe me. And that's what we're going to focus on today. You know, how to look at this entire full, exciting life that you have lived and how to get that into story form, okay? Whether it's just a few chapters that you write or whether, like Jim, it's an entire book, okay? But beginning is half done. And like Jim said, you can do this. Okay, so I was at Rodale for 23 years in various writing and editing jobs, and I had this opportunity based on one of the books I wrote to go on Crystal Cruises and not only give some talks on my books, but also I got the idea to teach this Memoirs at Sea course, okay? So I quit my job. It was kind of crazy thing to do with the blessing of my wife and went to sea. And I've been doing that for the last 15 years. So I've taught my course, a sampling of which you're going to get today, to hundreds of people from all over the world. And many, many of them have gone on to self-publish their books. And these are 3 of my favorites right here. And I just like to talk briefly about each one. The first book to ever come out of my class is that first one there on the left called Ernie Who. All right? So it was my first time teaching Memoirs at Sea. I had just quit my job of 23 years. And this guy shows up on the first day of class. His name was Ernie Jackson. And he says, "I'm here on this 3-month world cruise because of you." I said, "Because of me?" He said, "Yes." He says, "I always wanted to write my memoir, and you are going to teach me how to do it." Okay, well, that's a lot of pressure. I mean, Ernie and his wife had spent, a good chunk of their life savings to come on this 3-month cruise, and I better deliver. And then I found out that Ernie had been a policeman in the UK for his entire life. He was a genuine Bobby. Okay, the guys with the tall hats and the nightsticks, that was Ernie. And Ernie had only a grade school education, all right, had never written anything other than a police report in his life, and here my whole cruise career was really hanging on Ernie writing this book, all right? But he surprised me, and he turned out to be one of the best authors, best natural writers I have ever met. And that's because in his 40 years as a policeman, okay, he developed this incredible eye for detail. So if you watch CSI, you know, they go into a crime scene and, you know, they look at everything around them. They have this incredible eye for detail. So Ernie, who had no writing experience, used that eye for detail and looked at the stories in his past. And that's what he used to write a really incredible book. And you can see Ernie wasn't afraid to laugh at himself, okay? The title of the book, Ernie Who? I mean, who is this guy writing a book, all right? When he went back home after the cruise, his family and friends loved the book. He was on the local radio and TV stations, and he even had a documentary crew looking into doing a movie of his life. Okay, so that's a lot of fun when you're 75 years old, wouldn't you say? All right. And then the next one there in the middle, that's Jim Wood's book, The Man Who Danced Around the World. Still love that title. Confessions and Life Lessons from a Cruise Line Dance Host. All right? So when I first met Jim, everybody on the ship who works on the ship has a little name tag, okay? So I'm looking at Jim's and it says Ambassador Host. Now, I didn't know what, I thought he was a genuine ambassador. I asked, what country are you representing, Jim? But then he explained that he was a dance host, an ambassador dance host. So on cruise lines, a lot of single ladies come and they love to dance. And that was Jim's job. It was fascinating. And from the very start, I thought to myself, man, this guy's sitting on gold. I got to get him to write a book. All right? And he did. And that's the result. Okay? So it's part story about all the different places that Jim visited in a long career on the cruise ships, but it's also kind of a part manual on how to be a cruise ship dance host, which is very, very interesting, okay? And then this final one here, I may be homeless, but you should see my yacht, written by a woman named Mama Lee. So when Mama Lee was in her early 60s, her husband died, and they had loved traveling together. They had loved cruising together. And Mama Lee packed up the house and thought, well, I'll just move to a retirement community in Florida. And she looked at the prices and was all set to go there. And then she had an idea. She said, well, you know, I love to travel. I'm still fairly young. I wonder if you could live on a cruise ship full time. So she started to look into it, and sure enough, it was not that much more expensive than to live in a place like this. So she signed on first with Norwegian Cruise Lines, and then with Crystal, where I met her. She lived on the cruise ship for 20-some years, had the time of her life. Okay, so I sat down with her on my last world cruise, which was before the pandemic, and just listened to her stories. And they were amazing. And I helped her ghostwrite this book. And what was even more amazing is that it got bought by a Hollywood producer. And it was just about sold to Netflix when the pandemic hit. And nobody wanted a story about cruising during the pandemic when nobody was cruising. But anyway, it was kind of like the Golden Girls at Sea. It was going to be 4 ladies who retired and lived on a cruise ship. And we had already signed up. The late Kirstie Alley was going to play one of the roles. The woman from Sleepless in Seattle, that woman, yeah, Meg Ryan. And then, you know, the COVID hit. But anyway, that's still, simmering in some fashion, so maybe that will be made into a movie one day. So anyway, my point is that all three of these people, Ernie, Jim, Mama Lee, had no experience writing, let alone writing a book. All they wanted to do was capture some of their memories. And look what it turned into, okay? All three of them would, I think, consider this one of the highlights of their life. So you can do this. And I'm serious about that. Each and every one of you can do this. So why are you here? Why did you come today? Well, there are basically 6 reasons why people come to my class that I found out over the years. The biggest reason is that you've been pestered into coming here. Okay, and there's no shame in this. Okay, if your children or grandchildren have been elbowing you and saying, you got to write this stuff down, okay? And you're here because of them, you've been pestered into coming, that's totally fine, okay? Totally fine. Another reason people show up in my class is that writing a book is a bucket list thing for a lot of people. I mean, a lot of people want to write a novel, but let me tell you, writing a story about your life, a memoir, is much, much easier because you've already done all the research. You've already lived your life. All you got to do is put it down on paper or on the computer screen, okay? And then you'll get your bucket list item. Now, this third reason, I never anticipated this, but some people, maybe some people in this room, have a haunting story. In other words, something that happened to you or something that you experienced that you don't like to talk about. Maybe you've never spoken about it, okay? This is often common among men who've served in the military. Whether it's World Wars or Vietnam, you've probably all heard stories like that. I remember this one gentleman who came up to me after class one day on the ship, and he was very nervous, very anxious. When I shook his hand was all wet, damp. That's how nervous he was. And he said, I have this story that feels like it's alive inside me, and I got to get it out of me because it's killing me. And when he was a young boy growing up in Mississippi, he was at a high school dance. And after the dance, he was going home, walking across the football field, and he saw 2 white boys beat up and murder a young black boy. So he was very young at the time. He was scared. When this broke in the local news the next day that this boy was found dead and there was no clues as to who did it, he was too scared to say anything. He thought these guys would come after him. And for the next 40 years, he didn't tell anybody about this. But before he got on the ship, he had read in the paper that one of the white boys, one of the murderers, okay, was now running for U.S. Senate. So, of course, he felt an obligation to do something, to tell this haunting story of his. Okay? So I never saw this fellow again. I don't know what happened, but that is a great example of these stories that can eat you alive. And once you tell them, and it's not easy to tell them through writing, okay, you find peace. And I've seen it again and again and again. Okay, so in that respect, memoir writing can be therapeutic. It can actually make you healthier. It could take the stress and the burden that you've been carrying for so many years away from you. Okay? Another reason why people come to class is they're asking themselves the question, even later in life, who am I? Okay? Now, every year, you may have seen this list. At the end of the year, Google publishes the 10 most asked questions, okay, on Google. And one of them is always, who am I? Now, I don't know who's going on there and asking Google, who am I? Or what kind of answer they're getting, but evidently, people do that. So even at this stage of your life, some of you may be asking, you know, what has this all been about? Who am I? And believe it or not, the memoir writing process will help you answer that question. It will help you connect the dots of your life, give it some meaning, and even teach you new things about yourself. This is a good one. Some people write memoirs out of revenge. Here's the best example I've ever run across. Anybody, the rock band, The Who, okay? There was a fellow in that band called Roger Daltrey, long curly hair. Well, anyway, he recently published his memoir, and the title is called Thanks a Lot, Mr. Kibblewhite. Pretty unusual title, but anyway, it turns out Mr. Kibblewhite was the headmaster in Daltrey's middle school, who, when he expelled him, said, "Mr. Daltrey, you will never make anything of your life." So 60 years later, Roger Daltrey got his vindication. Who is your Mr. Kibblewhite? Okay, there's another reason for writing a memoir, although you got to be careful. You don't want to libel anybody. And then finally, a lot of people who come in here just don't know. You know, I'm sure there's a bunch of you like that in here now. You know, maybe you saw my picture in the elevator, which kind of startled me when I got in there this morning. I've never had my picture in an elevator. And thought, oh, this looks interesting, you know, or maybe you didn't have anything else to do and decided to come here. That's perfectly okay. Hopefully by the end of the talk, I will have inspired you to at least give this a shot. Okay, so everyone, and I mean everyone, has a story to tell. And I'm going to help you find your story today, and I'm going to help you tell it in a way that's engaging and that people will love reading. So if you don't believe me, here's a survey from the New York Times where they asked their readers, do you have an interesting life? Okay? 18% said very interesting, 52% said somewhat interesting, and 22% said not very. But when you do the math, 70% of people said they had a very or somewhat interesting life, okay? And only a small number said not very, okay? So chances are you've had something happen to you in your life that is interesting, that you'd probably like to write about and that others would find interesting too. All right, so I have 6 goals for today. 6 things I want to accomplish in our time together. The first is I'm going to talk about the difference between memoir and autobiography. They are not the same thing. We'll talk about the differences. That's key. The second thing is I'm going to share with you the 3 basic ingredients of a great story. And you heard me right. There are only 3 basic ingredients. I guarantee if you put those 3 ingredients in your memoir, in your story, it's going to be great. Sounds simple, huh? I'm also going to share with you 3 easy ways to improve your writing right now. Okay, so even if you don't go on to write a memoir or a story about your life, you're going to be able to take these tips and write better emails, letters, just communicate more effectively. Okay? You'll learn that too. Then I'm going to show you how to write a riveting, and I do mean riveting, first and second chapter. I'm going to share with you some of my favorite first and second chapters from some memoirs that I really think are successful. And then most important, I'm going to try to convince you that you can do this. You really can do this, regardless of your education, regardless of whether or not you think you're a good writer. You can do this, and it'll be good. And finally, if I fail in that, okay, if you still don't believe me, I'm going to end the class by showing you how to write a 6-word memoir. That's right, all you need to put on that page is 6 words, and you will be done with all this. You can forget about it, you can give it to your family, that's it. okay? I'm not kidding. All right, so here we go. We also have a class motto, all right? I wish to preserve and make sense of this life and perhaps help others make sense of their lives too. So there are three parts to that. What we're really out to do here is preserve our life, or at least a part of our life. You know, James Michener, the famous novelist, he said, when an older person dies, it's like a library burning down. Really great. So each and every one of you has a library of experiences and knowledge and wisdom inside you that you've accumulated throughout your entire life. I get chills when I say that quote because it's so true. Okay, so we're going to preserve some of that library and pass it on to our descendants. This is important work. Second part of that is, while we're preserving our life, we're going to make sense of your life. So Stephen King had a great quote. He says, I write to find out what I think. I write to find out what I think. He means that until you set an experience down on paper, until you ponder the perfect words to describe it, you can't fully appreciate or understand it. You're going to learn things about yourself, new things about yourself in this process. And then finally, if somewhere down the road, maybe long after we're gone, someone picks up that book, someone in your family, who knows, and reads it and finds some worth in it, wow, what a great gift we have left. So that's our class motto. That's what we're trying to accomplish here today. Okay, so just a brief aside. Who the hell am I? Okay, you know, if we were on the ship, you would start writing and you would start sharing intimate parts of your life with me. Okay, so some guy you just met on the ship. So I always tell my students, okay, you know, I do have some qualifications for this. I have a journalism major from Lehigh University. I worked for a morning call newspapers as a sports and features writer for 7 years, and then I spent 23 years at Rodale Press in a variety of editing and writing jobs. And I also wrote 6 books, 4 of which are Memoir, Another Shot, Accidental Courage, Wisdom, and Our Father's Guide to the Meaning of Life. So you may look at that and say, well, how does this guy written 4 memoirs? Okay, well, we're going to get into that in a minute, because a memoir is not an autobiography. You can only ever write one autobiography, but you could write umpteen memoirs. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then the Another Shot book, that one actually got me on the Oprah Winfrey Show, which was probably the highlight of my life, at least my mother's life, and sold a lot of books. So anyway, that's a little about me. And, you know, you talk about destiny, okay? Finding what you were meant to do in life. Well, my mother, who is now 89, surprised me a few Christmases ago with this. She was going through some old boxes, and this is one of the first things, I think it is the first thing I ever wrote, and it's called The Autobiography of Me, Myself, and I. So it's like, how ironic or sad is that you know, 50 years later, I'm still working on autobiographies and memoirs, okay? And that quote up there, Bobby Knight was the former coach of the Indiana Hoosiers basketball team, and he hated journalists and reporters. He was always at war with them. And his famous quote that he would look in their faces and say, all of us learn to write in the 2nd grade. Most of us go on to greater things. So anyway, that's me. Okay, all right, so what is memoir? Okay? Autobiography is the story of an entire life, your entire life from when you were born to where you are now and all the bits and pieces in between. Memoir is a story from a life, one story from a life. So this should instantly make this whole process much, much easier. So most people never begin because they think they have to write their autobiography. They think they have to write their entire life story. And that's a lot of work, okay, because you've lived such full lives. We're not going to do that. And frankly, okay, people don't want to know that much about you, okay? All right? So we're going to forget about autobiography, and we're going to focus on memoir. And it's going to make it so much easier. So here are some of the differences between autobiography and memoir, just so you're clear, because most people, again, don't know the difference between the two. So autobiography is always chronological. It starts when you were born, you're in the 3rd grade, you go to school, you get married, blah, blah, blah. It's chronological, okay? Memoir can jump around in time. It could start whenever, at any point of your life. There's no time constraints on a memoir. An autobiography, by its very name, is comprehensive. Memoir is selective. You're just choosing a part or two from your life, a chapter, if you will, from your life. Since we are in hoagie country, okay, I like to use the metaphor that an autobiography is like a hoagie. It's like a submarine sandwich. It's packed with stuff, with colorful stuff. And if you eat the whole thing, you're probably going to get indigestion, or you won't be able to finish it, okay? But a memoir is just one slice of that hoagie or that submarine sandwich. It's the most colorful. It's the most meaty. It's the most tasty. But it's just one slice of the sandwich of your life. Autobiography is just the facts. This happened, this happened, this happened. Just the facts, ma'am. Memoir are the facts, okay? Can't make this stuff up. The facts have to be there. But there's another layer, like the layer on a cake, the icing on a cake, and that is reflection. So you're not just telling your story, you're reflecting on your story from where you are now. And this is what makes memoir writing really exciting and really tasty for the reader. Because it's not just the facts, okay? It's the author thinking about, trying to connect the dots, trying to find the why in those facts from where they are now in life, okay? Autobiography is often written for self-promotion, okay? Memoir is written for self-discovery, okay? An autobiography, the author is usually trying to say, well, here's me. Here's my life. Isn't this great? Okay, and unless you're a Steve Jobs or a John Adams or a Thomas Jefferson or a Mark Twain, most people aren't interested to read that much about your life. But a memoir, someone just like you, who is exploring a facet of their life with an open mind. Here's why this happened, and here's where I think it led and what I learned from it. So it's self-discovery. Okay? An autobiography is generally emotionless. A memoir can get very, very emotional. I would teach an afternoon class on the ship, and when I got back to our stateroom, my wife would often greet me and say, well, how many people did you make cry today? And she was only half joking, because many people, even on this beautiful cruise ship, sailing in these amazing parts of the world, which we've all dreamed of, these people would choose to write about very dark corners of their life. And at first that really perplexed me. I was worried that I was ruining these people's vacations, because all they were doing was sitting in the computer lab writing and crying, literally, okay? But I learned that in these dark corners is where we really learn our lessons. In the failures are our successes. This is where our characters are hewn, in those dark corners, not in our happy moments. And if we are to pass anything along, it usually comes from those dark corners. Okay, so be prepared to go there, honestly. And then finally, for all those reasons, autobiography is usually boring, but memoir is exciting. All right, now there are a bunch of different types of memoirs. So if you pick up the New York Times on a Sunday and go to their bestseller list and look under nonfiction, you'll see a lot of memoirs. It's a very popular genre right now, and there are different types. The first is a misery memoir. And by that I mean, probably the best example of that is Angela's Ashes. Anybody read or see that? Yeah, written by a fellow named Frank McCourt, who grew up dirt poor in the Irish slums. His father used to beat him for no reason, just had a miserable, miserable childhood, managed to escape to the United States, where he became a high school teacher in the New York City system. So Angela's Ashes is the story of a misery memoir. Misery memoirs start out really, really bad, really miserable, but the character becomes a hero and a champion toward the end. So perhaps your story is a misery memoir, okay? There are also confessional memoirs, and these are the haunting story memoirs that I mentioned earlier. So it's almost like you as the author is going to confession and spilling this story that you've covered up for so many years, okay? Of course, there are celebrity memoirs. You know, just about every actor, you know, has sooner or later gets around to writing one of these. God knows there's been so many political memoirs in the last 4 years. You know, it seems everybody who's worked in the government now has a book. Those are political memoirs. There are also travel adventure memoirs. That would be where Jim Wood's book fits into. His would be a travel adventure memoir, because it's little slices of all these different experiences he's had all over the world. Maybe you have traveled somewhere or had some grand adventure. That could be your memoir, okay? There are also ones that are transformational quests, okay? How about Eat, Pray, Love? Okay, that's an example of a transformational quest. The author, Elizabeth Gilbert, got divorced. Her life just fell apart, and she decided to tour the world and see if she could find herself. So maybe you've had a similar experience. And then finally, and this is no joke, there are pet memoirs. Okay? And these things, they are gold. Probably the most famous example is Marley and Me by John Grogan. I know John. I worked with him for some years at Rodale. And John is living a very comfortable retirement because of Marley. You know, the movie with Jennifer Aniston and all the Marley plush dogs, and it's sickening. So if you have a great pet in your life, whether it's a dog or a cat or a bird or a ferret, who knows? If you have a good story around that pet, that's a memoir. And people love those kind of stories. They're comforting. They make you laugh. They remind you about the good things in life. Okay? So you not only have to pick your story, you kind of have to pick, you know, where it fits. Okay? All right. So I'm going to give you a little homework. So how do you determine what you're going to write about? Well, you do so by diagramming your life. Okay? So right now, you're like a hunter in a field, and there's this giant flock of geese overhead. And each goose represents some facet of your life. Okay, some chapter, some story. And there's 1,000 geese in the air. And you're trying to decide which one to shoot, which one to write about. How do you do that? That sounds impossible. This is the way we do it. We're going to diagram our life. And let me explain that to you. It's very simple. All you do is you draw a horizontal line across the page. On the left would be when you were born. On the right is where you are now in life. And These are doorways into finding story in your life, finding what to write about. So the first one, have you ever thought, what were the 6 most pivotal events in your life? So as you reflect back on your life from where you are now, what are the 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 pivotal events? Have you ever even thought that way? Most people don't. Okay? So say you come up with 6 pivotal events. So on that line you just drew, you would just do 6 little notches. Pivotal event 1, pivotal event 2, pivotal event 3, and maybe each of those then becomes a chapter in your book. And your theme is pivotal events of my life. Or maybe one pivotal event just jumps out and you say, wow, that's a whole book right there. Okay, so that's just one option. You could also think about your life and say, what are the 5 greatest lessons that I've learned in my life? Okay? Or what are my 7 foundational beliefs that make me who I am? Or what are your 10 commandments? And we're not going to steal God's. Okay? What are your 10 commandments? In other words, if you were given some tablets to a young Moses nowadays, what would be on those commandments? Have you ever thought about your life like this? This is the basis of Memoir. Or how about the 5 most critical choices you've made in your life? That's another way to look at this and find story. Or how about the 4 most pivotal people that you've met? Mentors, people who have influenced you. So then each chapter in the book would be a different person, a different profile of that person, your interactions with that person, why they were meaningful, and what they taught you. Okay? Or, what are the biggest conflicts in your life? You know, some of the most common ones are work versus family. We're always trying to find a balance between those two. Or security versus freedom. So if you can identify a conflict in your life that has been there for your whole life, then maybe that's the theme of your memoir. Okay? Ooh, here's a good one. Is anybody brave enough to write a memoir about their taboos? So each chapter is a subject that you don't like to talk about, but, you know, when you get retrospective, it has played a role in your life. You know, and incidentally, there's an island in the Pacific called Tonga. And in the Tongan language, taboo is spelled T-A-B-U, and it means sacred. Okay? So our taboos are not necessarily taboos. They may be sacred things that we need to confront to find peace. What are the 3 most defining moments in your life? Again, just another doorway in. What were the biggest loves in your life? And I don't just mean people. You know, maybe there's something you really love to do. Maybe there's a place you really love to spend time. Each could be a chapter. Okay? See how creative you can get with this? Autobiography does not allow any of this, but memoir does. This is what makes it fun. I had a woman in one of my classes on the ship. Tremendous idea. Each chapter in her memoir was a different house that she lived in. And when you think of it, you know, your home, these houses really influence and shape who we are. This is brilliant. So, of course, her childhood home was chapter 1. Then when she went away to college, her dorm room was chapter 2. Then the first apartment she had after she graduated. Then her first house with her husband. Brilliant. Brilliant. That's a memoir. Okay? Or, here's an even better one. There was another woman in my class. Each chapter in her memoir was a different piece of jewelry. So her mother died when she was very young. And for her 18th birthday, her father gave her a piece of her mother's jewelry. So in chapter 1, she told the story of that piece of jewelry and her mother and what it meant to her. And then in successive chapters, there were other different pieces of jewelry. So this was her life, but it was through the filter, this very creative filter of jewelry. Neat, huh? And then another person in a class, I thought this was also brilliant. You know, our life is not just a series of acquiring things. That's how we tend to look at it. It's also, for each and every one of us, a series of letting go of things. So this woman, her memoir, each chapter was a different thing that she had let go of. Her children, okay? Her loved ones, her husband, her career, her dreams, and the story of each of those letting goes and what it taught her, okay? So I'm sure that many of you, my father died of a heart attack at age 62 in his bed 6 months after he retired. I never got to say goodbye, never got to say I love you, and I wish, one of my biggest regrets is that he had done this. You know, it would be great if I had a book from my dad on my shelf, okay? Or even just, you know, a few pages that he had scribbled down of his thoughts and his experiences. And I see so many heads nodding. You share the same regret, don't you? You know, how great would it be if you had, you know, a book from your mom or your granddad that was on your shelf and you could take it down even just once a year, maybe, you know, at Christmas or the holidays and read it because you share their DNA. So this process is you helping your descendants not have that regret. Okay, this is almost a duty that you have to ensure happiness among your descendants. Okay, so that's an important aspect of this. All right, so here's how that diagram would look real quick. You know, you have that line going across the page, horizontal. It's when you were born, start, where you are now. And the LL there just stands for life lessons. That's the one I picked. You could pick any of those previous ones as the doorway in. So, you know, say you identify 6 life lessons, you know, that's how you put them on your diagram. And each could be a different chapter, or lesson number 4 might just jump out and say, wow, I could write a whole book about that one. And you would focus on that. Okay? All right. So let's get to so all of you should start to have an idea of what you want to write about. Okay? Maybe some of you have a haunting story. Maybe some of you say, well, you know, I like the life lessons idea, or I like the jewelry idea. So, you know, you're starting to get at least a rough idea of what that story is going to be. Okay? So once you have that idea, how do you start to tell the story in a way that people are going to want to read it, okay, and that they're going to find really engaging? Well, you want to give it this test. You have your idea, and you want to ask, does it have the 3 ingredients of a great memoir? And those 3 ingredients are desire, struggle, realization. All right, and I'll explain each of these. So, in the beginning, story in its simplest form is what you wanted, how you struggled to get what you wanted, and what you realized from that struggle. Every story, every movie, if you enjoyed it and you thought it was really good, I guarantee it's going to have these 3 ingredients. So next time you read a book, you finish a book, or watch a movie that you really enjoyed, just take a minute and say, all right, what was the desire, what was the struggle, and what was the realization? And I bet you it had all 3 of those things. And conversely, if you start reading a book and you stop halfway, or you start watching a movie on Netflix and you stop halfway, I bet you it didn't have desire, struggle, realization. This is the key, okay? And nobody owns this stuff, okay? There's no copyright on desire, struggle, realization. You could steal it and make it your own. In fact, authors do this again and again and again. This is the formula for really good writing, especially memoir writing. All right, so a character or a protagonist is required in the beginning. That person is you. You are the star of this story. Something happened to you. That's called the initiating incident, all right? It's not when you were born, because this is not autobiography. Something happened to you, and it created a problem, a desire, a need, a want. And by establishing in the beginning your problem and need, you start what's called a desire line that's going to go all the way through the book. Now, the main character's desire line can bend, it can twist, it can turn. In fact, the more twists and turns, the better for the reader, but it can't break. It has to continue through the whole book. It should be intense and continuous, and over the course of the story, you're going to change as a character. You're going to start in one place, you're going to tell your story, and you're going to end up probably a better person. Okay? All right? So, there's a classic song by the Rolling Stones called "You Can't Always Get What You Want." I hope you know it because you do not want me to sing it. But the lyrics correspond to these three things. That's how I remember it. The lyrics go, "You can't always get what you want, but if you try sometime, you just might find you get what you need." So in the beginning of the story, you have a problem or a desire. You can't always get what you want. In the middle, you have a fight to get it, the struggle. And in the conclusion, you have a transformative realization. You just might find you get what you need. Now, like I said, this is the test. You know, once you do your homework, once you diagram your life, and you think you know what you want to write about, ask yourself, what's the desire, what's the struggle, what's the realization? Now, here's the exciting thing. You may write down what you think is the realization from this story. But as Stephen King said, I write to find out what I think. As you write this story, as you write the desire, as you write how you struggled for that thing you wanted or needed, you may come to a totally different realization. I see it happen all the time. You may say, wow, that's why this really happened the way it did. And this is how it affected me. I never saw that. Okay? And that's the exciting and powerful component of memoir. All right, so now I'm going to try to make this as easy as I can for you. This is an outline for your memoir. Okay, you identify the story you want to tell. You make sure it passes that desire, struggle, realization test, and then just follow this outline. Okay? I mean, I can't write the book for you, but I can give you the skeleton, the framework. All right, so you can see, very simply, it's divided into a beginning, a middle, and an end. And desire, struggle, realization corresponds to those three parts. So the beginning, where we establish the desire, the problem, or the need that you're trying to solve in your memoir, that's usually pretty short, okay? The bulk of the book is the middle, the struggle, the fight, okay? And then again, the realization is also usually just a few chapters. So in the beginning, we have that initiating incident, and I'm going to share with you a few examples of that in a minute. The problem, the need, the want is established, the desire line begins. Then we go to the middle of the book with all the conflicts with adversaries who are trying to prevent you from getting what you want. There are interim pivotal events. And then we get to the end where there's the climax and the lessons. Okay? So follow that outline. Follow that framework, which has been followed by countless authors and memoirists through the decades, and you're going to produce a pretty good story. All right, now before I go on, there's one component of this that I got to be honest about, and you need to be honest with yourself about. So if you pick a part of your life that you feel compelled to write about, you got to be prepared to write honestly about this. So just like when you're having a conversation with somebody in the hall about something or at dinner, you can kind of tell when they're not telling you the full story, right? You kind of sense it. They're leaving something out. Well, the reader can tell the same thing with an author or a book, that they're not telling me the full story here. You got to have the courage to tell the full story, and you have to tell it truthfully. There's a famous example. Maybe you've read the book A Million Little Pieces by James Fry. James Fry was on Oprah, and afterwards his book became a mega bestseller. And it was the story of his addiction and his struggles with really just staying alive. And in the book, he wrote that his girlfriend had committed suicide and that he had spent time in prison. But after the book became this mega bestseller, his girlfriend showed up and said, "Hey, I'm living here in San Diego. I'm still alive." Okay? And then, reporters started to dig into the rest of the book, and they found out that James Fry had never been in jail. So a memoir has to be 100% truthful. Okay? This is not fiction. This is nonfiction. You can't stretch the truth here. And James Fry went back on the Oprah show, and she just eviscerated him for lying. Okay? So if you pick one of these dark corners of your life, if you identify one of them, or if you're going to tell a haunting story, you got to be able to go there fully and write with nobody looking over your shoulder. Some of the best advice I got is that if you have a story like this, which is really difficult to tell, write it and then throw it away. But that's going to give you the freedom to write it in a very free manner. But I would bet that when your finger is hovering over the delete key, that you're not going to delete. Okay? You would have invested so much of yourself in it, and it will have worth, and you will realize that. Okay? Now, just one quick thing about truth. There is the truth. Okay? The truth sometimes cannot be known. The truth can only be known through kind of reporting. In other words, there's always another side to the story. There's always another side to the truth. Okay? You're going to write your truth. And you're not going to, it's a tough concept to explain, but you must believe it. Okay? You can't exaggerate it. This is what you truly believe, honestly. Okay? So it may not be the truth, but it's your truth. It's what you believe. Okay? All right. Okay, so here's a few tips on improving our writing. So you've identified what you're going to write about in your memoir. You've given it the desire, struggle, realization test. Now you're actually going to start writing. Okay, so there are a few components of writing that are very, very important, whether you're writing memoir or whether you're writing emails or letters or any type of communication. The first thing is simple description. Okay? So, most people, well, here's what we're going to do. Okay. We're going to play a little game here. I visited the dining room. Jim gave me a quick tour before I came down here today. And I'm assuming that most of you live here and are probably in that dining room, I don't know, at least 3 times a day. And maybe if you've been here for years, you've probably spent like days or months, cumulatively in that dining room. Okay, so I want you to just spend a minute. I'm going to stop talking. And I want you to travel in your mind's eye. Stay here, don't go up there, okay? Back to the dining room. And I just want you to either write down or jot, make a note in your head of the specific detail that you see up there. In other words, if you were writing an email to a member of your family who had never been here, and you were explaining to them what the dining room here is like, how would you bring that to life? Okay? So just think about that a minute. jot down a few items of specific description or detail, okay? Okay, everybody has at least a couple things? Yeah, Jim. Okay. Can still hear me? Good, okay. Okay, so a memoir is your personal legacy. It should make your descendants feel like they know you, that you're in the room talking to them. So we all have the skeleton of a story now, the bones of a good tale, a rough idea of what we're going to write about. Now our challenge is to breathe life into it, to dress it up, to make it feel human, and the easiest way to do that is with simple description. So there are two ways of viewing the world. One is superficially, which is the way the vast majority of people do it, okay? The second way is deliciously, which is the way great writers see it. They learn to notice and savor the unique detail in everything. Let me read you an opening paragraph from a story that appeared in the New Yorker. And it's about school lunchrooms, of all things. But as I read this, listen to the description in this. The lunch ladies of my elementary school memories in Oklahoma are a stout, sweet-tempered breed. They wear cat's eye glasses and have beauty shop perms, with hairnets drawn taut across their foreheads. They have gray uniforms and dishwater complexions and stand in line dolloping out grayish food, boiled okra, spinach with vinegar, cornbread and black-eyed peas, smiling wearily as if they knew that they were slowly killing us. Okay, now think about the magic that this writer has accomplished in less than 100 words. You know, he has transported us from Nazareth, Pennsylvania, to a lunch line in Oklahoma. How did he work that magic? Simple description, okay? He didn't just say these lunch ladies wore glasses. They wore cat's eye glasses. And that's a bit of specificity that says something, right? We know the type of women who wear cat's eye glasses. And they didn't just smile, they smiled wearily. And the food wasn't just okra and spinach. It was gray, okay? All right, so that's a great example of simple description, okay? So now, as you traveled back to the dining room, what was some of the detail that you saw there? Anybody? Well, I have lots. Go ahead, yeah. Mm-hmm. Get more specific. What are those doors made of? How big are they? Oh, well, okay, yeah. So you've just supplied some detail, some general detail, but I'm trying to get you to supply some specific detail, just like this author did in the lunchroom. Okay, so as you come up the ramp to the dining room, there are two paintings on the left-hand side that you've passed probably a gazillion times. What are those two paintings? They're two terriers. They're two dogs. Okay? So writers notice this kind of stuff. Okay? So you can make a game of this. Okay? Next time you're bored, maybe you're sitting in the doctor's office, maybe you're sitting on the bus, I don't know, maybe you're sitting out front. exercise your writer's eye. That's what this is called. And look around you, become more aware of the detail. And pretty soon, as you direct your gaze back to these parts of your life, a common thing that people tell me is, oh, I can't remember, this part of my life or that part of my life very clearly. You know what? You can. Just give yourself the chance, okay? And the more you think about a particular thing that happened, the more memories are going to come back, all right? So work on developing your writer's eye. Okay, that's simple description. You use that in any type of writing, make your writing more descriptive, it's going to be instantly better. Okay? Second thing is similes and metaphors. So this is taking simple description to the next level. Okay? It's comparing two different things. All right, there's a great book called Running with Scissors, written by a fellow named Augustine Burroughs, and he, in my opinion, is the master of the simile. Here's some examples from his book. Her 4 children each had perfectly white, straight teeth like a piano keys, that's good. Like a picket fence, good. How about, he said, chiclets. You know the gum? Chiclets, okay? My brother was as reliable as a blank. My brother was as reliable as a blank. How about a mathematical formula? So you see how he's thinking? So this isn't just genius that comes out of, the clouds and strikes the writer. So he's thinking white, straight teeth. What type of things are white, straight? Piano keys would work, picket fence would work, and chiclets would work. My brother was reliable. Okay, what types of things are reliable? Well, 1 + 1 always equals 2. So this is creative logic, okay? And you can do it. Instead of just saying, oh, he was like this, or this is how I would describe him, try to do a simile or metaphor. Take it to the next level, and your writing will become really, really exciting. There's so many examples of this. The Japanese author Haruki Murakami. Sometimes you're just the sweetest thing, like Christmas, summer vacation, and a brand new puppy all rolled into one. How great is that? Okay? The two of us stood there. We look at the snow. The snow is fluffy, like stuffing spilling out of a torn cloud. That's good writing. But it's just creative logic. You can do it. Okay? All right. And then finally, avoid cliches. You all know what these cliches are. Nothing should sell like hotcakes, not even hotcakes. All right? Cliches are going to weaken your writing because people have been describing these things this way for ages. All right? When I run into a cliche in a book, or if I hear it in a TV series, man, it kind of like hurts me, Try to get to that point. Avoid cliches like the plague, and your writing is instantly going to be stronger. All right? Now, let's see how we're doing on time. Okay, all right. Let's go on to the best first chapters of all time. All right, so I'm going to read you the openings from The Glass Castle and Unbroken, which I consider to be 2 of the best first chapters of all time. We're not going to have time for Memoirs of a Geisha or Tender at the Bone, but maybe they're in the library here. Do you have a library here? Yeah, or you could look them up online, and you could kind of, see what I'm talking about. But, okay, the beginning, chapter 1 is the most important part of your memoir, or any story for that matter. It has to literally reach out from the page and grab the reader. We're all so busy nowadays that we can't afford to waste time, and the internet has transformed our reading habits. Our tendency is to skim everything. It's as if we all have attention deficit disorder now. So the writer's job has become more challenging. You have to write so well in that first chapter that you got to make the reader pause and ponder and decide to continue. So nowadays, your first chapter almost has to be like a wake-up slap in the face to get people's attention. So here's how The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls begins. And I'm going to read this to you, and then I'm going to talk about why I think it's such a great first chapter and what qualities you can steal from it in your first chapter. Okay? Has anyone read this book, by the way? Okay. All right, here's how it begins. I was sitting in a taxi wondering if I had overdressed for the evening when I looked out the window and saw Mom rooting through a dumpster. A blustery March wind whipped the steam coming out of the manholes, and people hurried along the sidewalks with their collars turned up. I was stuck in traffic 2 blocks from the party where I was heading. Oh, where's the rest of that? Okay, well, hey, that's enough to give you the idea. Okay, this woman is in a taxi. She's obviously well-to-do. She lives in New York. She's heading to a party. It's an ugly evening in New York City, and she looks out and sees her mom rooting through a dumpster, obviously homeless. Okay, now if I had the rest of that chapter, it would have ended by the woman getting very embarrassed, slinking down in her seat and telling her driver to take her home to her place on Park Avenue. So put yourself in that situation. If you were going to a party in New York City, if you lived on Park Avenue and you saw your mom rooting through a dumpster on a cold March evening, what would you do? You'd roll down the window and you'd say, Mom, get in here. Come on, let's go back to my place. I'll give you a good meal. We'll take a hot bath and, we'll take care of you. But instead, this woman is so embarrassed for some reason that she can't do that and tells her driver to take her home. That's a pretty good opening to a book, right? Okay, do you want to read more about what's going on here? Okay, so the problem that's being established here is that this woman obviously has a pretty bad relationship with her mother, and she feels bad about it, okay? So the whole book is going to be about how she tries, how this happened and how she's trying to rectify it. So why do I think that is such a good opening? Well, first off, it has a few things. There's juxtaposition. Anybody hear that writing word before? It means putting 2 different things together. And in this case, it's a very successful woman and a homeless woman who just happened to be mother-daughter. And they're put together, okay? And whenever you put different things together, there's conflict, and that interests the reader, okay? Also, there's great description there, wasn't there? Even in just that first little paragraph, the steam coming out of the manholes. It transported you. So the other thing that simple description does is it transports the reader. And whenever an author can take the reader from where they are and plop them into someplace else and evoke emotion from them, then you've hooked them. Okay? All right. So here's another one. Anybody read Unbroken? This is a heck of a one. Let me read you the beginning of this, and I do have the full one here. All he could see in every direction was water. It was late June 1943. Somewhere on the endless expanse of the Pacific Ocean, Army Air Forces bombardier and Olympic runner Louis Zamperini lay across a small raft drifting westward. Slumped alongside him was a sergeant, one of his plane's gunners. On a separate raft, tethered to the first, lay another crewman, a gash zigzagging across his forehead. Their bodies, burned by the sun and stained yellow from the raft dye, had withered down to skeletons. Sharks glided in lazy loops around them, dragging their backs along the rafts, waiting. The men, is a true story, the men had been adrift for 27 days. Borne by an equatorial current, they had floated at least 1,000 miles deep into Japanese-controlled waters. The rafts were beginning to deteriorate into jelly and gave off a sour, burning odor. The men's bodies were pocked with salt sores, and their lips were so swollen that they pressed into their nostrils and chins. They spent their days with their eyes fixed on the sky, singing White Christmas, muttering about food. A month earlier, 26-year-old Louis Zamperini had been one of the greatest runners in the world, expected by many to be the first to break the 4-minute mile, one of the most celebrated barriers in sport. Now his Olympian's body had wasted to less than 100 pounds, and his famous legs could no longer lift him. On that morning of the 27th day, the men heard a distant, deep strumming. Every airman knew that sound, pistons. Their eyes caught a glint in the sky, a plane high overhead. Zamperini fired 2 flares and shook powdered dye into the water, enveloping the rafts in a circle of vivid orange. The plane kept going, slowly disappearing. The men sagged. Then the sound returned and the plane came back into view. The crew had seen them. With arms shrunken to little more than bone and yellowed skin, the castaways waved and shouted, their voice thinned from thirst. The plane dropped low and swept alongside the rafts. Zamperini saw the profiles of the crewmen dark against bright blueness. There was a terrific roaring sound. The water in the rafts themselves seemed to boil. It was machine gun fire. This was not an American rescue plane. It was a Japanese bomber. The men pitched themselves into the water and hung together under the rafts, cringing as bullets punched through the rubber and sliced effervescent lines in the water around their faces. The firing blazed on, then sputtered out as the bomber overshot them. The men dragged themselves back onto the one raft that was still mostly inflated. The bomber banked sideways, circling toward them again. As it leveled off, Zamperini could see the muzzles of the machine guns aimed directly at them. Zamperini looked toward his crewmates. They were too weak to go back in the water. As they lay down on the floor of the raft, hands over their heads, Zamperini splashed overboard alone. Somewhere beneath him, the sharks were done waiting. They bent their bodies in the water and swam toward the man under the raft. And that's the way Unbroken, chapter 1, ends. Okay, now you want to read more of that, don't you? Okay, so why is that such a great opening? All right, well, let's give it our test. Okay, there's definitely a desire there, right, and a problem. You know, they're in the middle of the Pacific, and they want to live. All right, the struggle, okay, well, these are Japanese bombers trying to kill him. Okay, then the realization is going to come later in the book how this affected his life. Okay, so it has the makings of a great memoir right there. It also is transportive, wasn't it? Lots of great description. You know, the fact that, you know, his lips had swollen so much that, you know, he couldn't smell. That the raft was out in the sun so long it was turning to jelly. Okay, and it was transported us, didn't it? You know, it took us from Nazareth, Pennsylvania, to a raft in the middle of the Pacific. Amazing, okay? It also took us on an emotional roller coaster, didn't it? Okay? You know, we saw the plane along with them, and we thought we're going to be saved. And then we saw the muzzles of the machine guns, okay? And then the most important lesson I want you to take from this example is the chapter ended at the point of highest action. Okay? Now, obviously, Zamperini wasn't killed because he went on to write 250 more pages. We all know that he's not going to be killed. Okay? But instead of, you know, saying that, you know, he stayed in the water, the sharks didn't get him, and he was alone on that raft for another month, he just cut it off, you know, when the sharks were done waiting. So if you've ever read any James Patterson or any, you know, other popular author, that's the technique they use. It's called the cliffhanger ending. So if that fits your story, by all means, end each chapter of your memoir at the point of highest action. And that's going to, you know, create that page turner amongst your readers. Okay? All right. So you can, you know, find these other two, Memoirs of a Geisha and Tender at the Bone, and ask yourself, you know, okay, what makes these beginnings so great? Okay, do they have juxtaposition? What's the description here? And you'll start to see some common elements come out here. Okay, and I just want to share this. Just as all stories have a desire, struggle, and realization, they also have a shape. Okay, so the vertical axis would be the level of action in the story. Okay, and the horizontal axis would be the timeline of the story. So we're always going to start at a pretty high level of action, just like Unbroken did, right? Okay, so neither of those stories started in the beginning. It didn't start when Louis Zamperini or when Jeanette Walls was born, okay? It started with the initiating incident. Those are two examples of initiating incidents. So after the initiating incident, after your first chapter, you're going to take a big step back in time to when the story actually began. So the second story the second chapter in Unbroken is back when Louis Zamperini was 12 years old. And he saw this dirigible go over his house in San Francisco and looked up at it in wonder and said, I want to be an airman one day. Okay? In the Jeanette Walls story, her chapter 2 is when she was 3 years old and she was in a dress and she was cooking her lunch and the dress caught fire. So chronologically, this was when her difficulty with her mother started. Where was the mom? Who leaves a 3-year-old to cook her own lunch? Okay? So we start with an initiating incident at a high point of action, then we take a step back in time to where the story really began, and then we go chronologically from there all the way back to the realization. Okay? So that's another simple framework that you can steal and make your own. Okay, to wrap up now, I hope you can start to feel that you just might be able to do this, right? Okay, maybe, yeah? You still look skeptical. Let's take the writer's test. Let's take the Are You a Writer's test. Okay, how many of you have been writing something, whether it's an email or a letter, or maybe you started a novel or a book or something, and you sit down and you look up and like an hour or two has passed? Has anybody had that experience with a show of hands? All right, quite a few of you. So if you've had that experience, that's called the sweet spot. You know, I imagine architects have it when they're creating blueprints, CPAs when they're doing taxes, although I can't fathom that. And writers have it when they're writing. So if you can immerse yourself in an activity like that to the point where you lose track of time, you have a knack for that. Okay? Yeah, am I a writer's test? And even if you didn't raise your hand, okay, you have a writing muscle. It's just kind of out of shape. And just like your biceps muscle, okay, you go to the gym every day or every other day and you try to strengthen that biceps muscle, well, you could strengthen your writing muscle. And the way you do that is by writing every day. Set yourself a goal. Okay, maybe you're going to write a couple pages every day. When I have a project, when I'm writing on a book, working on a book, I set my goal at 500 words a day. If you use Microsoft Word, it'll tell you how many words you write. And some days I'm there for 30 minutes and I'm out. The words just flow. Some days I'm there for a couple hours or the entire morning. But I don't leave that desk until, you know, I write those 500 words. I exercise my writing muscle every day. All right? Also, we want to stretch out your story. So once you identify what you're going to write about, you want to be a patient writer. You want to stretch out that story. So many people come up to me on the ship like a week after our first class, and they give me like 10 pages and say, okay, that's it. Here's my book. Okay, well, just to give you an idea, an average size book, you know, one that's going to feel pretty good in your hand is about, you know, 150 to 200 pages, right? That's about 50 to 65,000 words, okay? So you may think that if you stretch your story out, it's going to become more boring. But if you use description and dialogue, and if you put in other characters other than yourself, these are all things I would talk more about if we were on a world cruise over the course of 3 months. I teach you how to do these things. But if you put in all these elements, some of which I've shared with you today, it won't get more boring. It'll get more engaging. So try to stretch out your story and be a patient writer. Okay, use your writer's eye to put in the detail. And then finally, let's do a little experiment. Everybody raise their index finger, please. Okay, now without thinking, I want you to point to yourself. Point to yourself. Okay, most of you are pointing to your chest. Okay? So you could have pointed to your head, where most of us live, and some of you did that. And there's nothing wrong with that. Okay? But we write from here, not from here. This is important. So after you've written a chapter or a few pages, here's another test. I want you to reread it, and then I want you to ask yourself with your finger, where did that come from? If it came from up here, you've overthought it. You're probably writing with people looking over your shoulder. But if it comes from here, then it's good. Okay? All right. Now, finally, I know I'm not going to get you all. Hopefully I'll get some of you, but there still may be a few who say, all right, I listened to this guy, I'm not going to be able to write a book. But I still want to write a memoir. I still want to leave a legacy of some sort. Here's how to write a 6-word memoir. Okay? Essentially a bumper sticker for your life. All right? So this came about through a literary magazine called Smith, S-M-I-T-H. You probably never heard of it. It was real small. And the editors there one day were brainstorming, and they said, hey, how about if we challenge our readers to write 6-word memoirs? They didn't know what kind of reaction they were going to get. Thousands of people sent them 6-word memoirs. In fact, it became a franchise. There are, if you search on Amazon, there are lots of 6-word memoir collection books, and there's even a 6-word memoir a board game. So anyway, here's some of my favorite 6-word memoirs. So this is a whole life summarized in 6 words. Yes to every date, met mate. He wore dresses, this caused messes. And this must have been written by a frustrated memoir writer. On the 7th word, he rested. Tried to get ahead, again, didn't. Never really finished anything except cake. Oh, here's a good one. Found true love, married someone else. Bad brakes discovered at high speed. Is my favorite. Ex-wife and contractor now have house. Dreams don't work unless you do. Tequila made her clothes fall off. Never marry the dumb, cute one. And, oh man, pee at each and every opportunity. So this is another doorway in, actually. Okay, if you're still struggling for what to write about, try to write a 6-word memoir. I mean, it might encapsulate your whole book. Okay, in other words, wouldn't you love to read a book about ex-wife and contractor now have house? That's going to be pretty steamy. Okay, so anyway, have fun with that. And you can actually make bumper stickers. Give them to your family at Christmas. Say, hey, here's my memoir. Enjoy it. Okay? So 6 words, 1 life. What's yours? And thank you very much for coming today. I hope you took something from it. I enjoyed it. Good luck.
Mr. Joe Kita, what do you think? Mr. Joe Kita, have some good words for you? He's had them for me. Thank you so much, Joe, for coming and visiting.
Thank you.
You have a few minutes if somebody wants to come up and talk to you?
Sure, yeah, if you have questions, sure. Sure, yeah.
When you're not cruising, you're on land. Do you ever work with people as you go on a cruise?
I do, yeah. There's my contact information there.